Let's bring in Bruce Fein. He's a lawyer specializing in constitutional and international law. Bruce, thanks so much for joining our program again.
Thank you.
Well, let's first talk and recap all the various legal cases that Trump faces. He faces 4 separate legal cases, 91 charges in total. Then the first of his criminal trials on hush money charges is set to start, as we said earlier, on April 15th. So the big question is, what are the chances that one or any of these trials can be wrapped up by the election?
Well, I think the chances of the trial relating to the alleged wrongful description of hush money payment as legal fees is very likely to conclude before November. I also believe that we should get a decision probably sometime in April, late April, from the Supreme Court on the January 4th indictment alleging that Mr. Trump attempted to defraud the United States and to obstruct congressional proceedings and counting electoral votes by inciting and encouraging his mob to so-called kill Mike Pence, who is to count the votes. And I believe that can conclude. It's a pretty straightforward case, built a lot on the evidence assembled by the January 6th Congressional Committee before November. The other 2 are more remote. That is, one relates to his taking of presidential records, national security defense information to his home in Mar-a-Lago, and concealed and hid them and attempted to obstruct investigation of whether his retention of those documents was illegal. I don't think that's going to happen for November. And then we have the Georgia case concerning Fani Willis. This is racketeering and efforts by Mr. Trump allegedly to recruit illegal electors to feign that they were entitled to vote in the Electoral College, which they weren't. But I think because of the brouhaha over her hiring someone who may or may not have been her lover before she hired this gentleman, and recusal motions, that's not likely to get a decision before November. But Bruce, 2 of the cases are likely.
Sorry, Bruce, to interrupt you, but I want to ask, what kind of impact will this have, do you think, on the election and voters? I mean, in the end, to put it bluntly, do people even care?
Well, I think some people care. I don't want to overestimate it. I think that Trump's base doesn't care. But there are some, especially because Biden, I believe, is a very weak candidate, who are wavering between Biden or Trump, or maybe none of either of them. And if it's a close race, you don't need a huge number of changed votes to change the election outcome. I do think that there's certainly some Trump supporters. I don't know whether I would put the percentage at 20%, 10, 30%, but a serious number who would not vote for Trump if he was convicted of crimes and possibly sentenced to prison, while the November elections are occurring. We have historically had a member, his name Eugene Debs, who was in prison, and he got over 1 million votes in 1920, but he was convicted under the Espionage Act for protesting our intervention in Russia without a declaration of war. But it has happened before. I think Mr. Trump is no Eugene Debs, but he could technically still run for office if he's sitting in jail on November balloting day.
Bruce, we have a very short amount of time left. I have one question for you, if you could make it brief as much as you can. If Trump does win this election, I know it's a hypothetical, but if he does win the election, do you think he could potentially pardon himself? Is that even legally possible?
Well, the answer is too complicated. It's yes and no. He can't pardon himself from the state charges, which are in Georgia and New York. He could pardon himself, arguably, from the convictions in the January 4th case and in the Mar-a-Lago case. However, I was at the Justice Department when we considered this issue when Richard Nixon was in office and thought he might try to pardon himself from Watergate crimes. And we concluded then the president doesn't have power to pardon himself because of the conflict of interest. But the U.S. Supreme Court has never opined on it, so it's still an open question.
I'm sure we'll bring him back, Bruce, for all of these legal cases as all these trials unfold. Bruce Fein, thank you so much for joining our program again.
Thank you.